In your solitude on Tatooine, training I have for you.
Training?
An old friend has learned the path to immortality. One who has returned from the netherworld of the Force, your old master.
Qui-Gon? Master Qui-Gon.
Well, took you long enough.
Beginning to think you'd never come.
I was always here, Obi-Wan. You just were not ready to see.
I remember being very excited when it was first announced that Disney was doing a series on Obi-Wan Kenobi. Finally, a show about one of my favorite characters in Star Wars, and it's about his time between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. How can someone not get excited about that? And man, when the show finally aired, it was alright. It could have been much better in so many ways, namely the main villain, but it was truly fantastic in one aspect. Obi-Wan Kenobi himself. This video will examine the portrayal of Obi-Wan's character arc in the show and why it was not only very well written, but how it also teaches us lessons about the nature of people's characters and traits and how they evolve or devolve over time. Obi-Wan Kenobi in the time before and during the Clone Wars was the ideal Jedi. A calm, collected realist with a strict adherence to the Jedi Code, a master of the defensive form of lightsaber combat, who always chose negotiation over outright combat, a man who hardly ever operates out of fear, but out of a set of carefully calculated decisions to reach the objectives of his missions and goals. Hell, he is so devoted to the Jedi Order that in Star Wars Battlefront 2, he recites parts of the Jedi Code in the middle of battles as he destroys droids in the rocky deserts of Geonosis. All of this to say that Obi-Wan is the most ideal Jedi, who is then given the least ideal Jedi to be his apprentice. Unlike Obi-Wan, Anakin is hot-headed, passionate, and emotional. Although these opposing personalities can make them a very formidable team, it often led to Obi-Wan trying to impose his will onto Anakin. These attempts on changing Anakin into someone more like himself likely fueled a feeling of failure that Obi-Wan felt when Anakin turned his back on the Jedi and became a Dark Lord of the Sith. He thought that he not only had failed Anakin, but the Jedi as a whole, the Jedi Order, the way of life that he devoted himself to, the only family that he had ever known, the order for which he sacrificed the love of his life for, was destroyed by his apprentice because he was unable to keep him in the light side of the Force. The same apprentice whom he had raised since he was a young boy, he proceeds to fight to the death in a grueling duel where he brutally mutilated and disfigured his apprentice and left him to die on Mustafar. Obi-Wan is then tasked to look after Anakin's secretly conceived children until they are old enough to be trained in the ways of an order he believes he indirectly was responsible in destroying, while also presumably living out the rest of his days in exile, hiding on a remote planet, away from the prying eyes of the Empire. Obi-Wan's feelings of failure are carried over with him to his new life on Tatooine, where he's constantly haunted by the memories of his past. Star Wars fans often say that Anakin died during the Jedi Purge and Darth Vader was born from his ashes. However, by the end of the duel with Anakin, Obi-Wan Kenobi died as well. The man we see at the start of the show is not Obi-Wan Kenobi, but Ben Kenobi, and it's important to distinguish the two from each other. It's evident that Ben Kenobi was deeply traumatized by his duel with Anakin, like when he experiences nightmares of their fight in the first episode. He harbored profound regret for his inability to save both his apprentice and his apprentice's secret wife. Although he successfully rescued the children, they remained under constant threat from the Empire, placing a great deal of pressure on him. And after being in hiding for so many years, and seeing what the Empire is capable of, he lost his will to fight and just wanted to hide until the time was right, quote unquote, to train Luke. But Ben was so mentally detached from everything that he likely would have hesitated whenever the time that was right finally came. He even refused to help another Jedi who was running away from the Empire and was urging him to abandon his Jedi ways, That's how far gone Ben was from the man he once was. His willingness to fight wasn't just broken by his trauma or the presence of the Empire, but also by his growing apathetic nature due to hiding on Tatooine for many years. Keep in mind, he left his life as a Jedi, which is a fulfilling, purposeful life full of exciting adventures, to being a meat factory worker on a backwater planet doing 9 to 5. Look at how much we, as regular folks in the real world, hate 9 to 5 jobs and how much they crush our spirits. Now imagine that multiplied by 10 plus all of the mental trauma, and you get the sad state of Ben Kenobi at the start of the series. After Ben spends about 10 years sulking about everything that had happened to him, he receives news from Bail Organa that Princess Leia had been kidnapped. Ben initially refuses to help out, but he eventually gets persuaded by Organa to rescue his daughter. Notice how Ben conducts himself during his mission on Daiyu. He doesn't use the Force or his lightsaber, but instead uses a blaster. Although Obi-Wan described blasters as uncivilized in Revenge of the Sith,
So uncivilized.
Ben doesn't really give a fuck about it being civilized or not. It just does its job while keeping his true identity under wraps. After finding Leia, he tries to escort her out of Daiyu, but Leia begins to distrust Ben and she gets herself into a dangerous situation. Ben is then forced to use the Force, to save her, which is a very difficult task for him since he hasn't really used the Force in that fashion for a very long time. This is a major moment in Ben's arc. Although he has just started to be a Jedi again, there are already some hiccups in his path. Ben gets his ass thoroughly kicked by Darth Vader. The reason for which are not only because he hasn't really fought or trained in the ways of the Force for 10 years, but also because Ben has serious PTSD about his previous fight against Vader, which you can see when the third sister reveals that Anakin is still alive, and when Vader makes his way through the town. Ben was not mentally or physically ready to face his former apprentice, especially when Vader has been trying to find Ben for 10 years, and has been hunting down the surviving Jedi for most of that time. Vader was arguably at his strongest at that point, while Ben was at his absolute weakest. But then Ben had something that would propel him to greater heights of power. Purpose. Ben's Force abilities begin to show themselves again as he begins to find a greater purpose or reason to use them. Although he can hardly hold Leia in the air at first, he can later stop glass from breaking under an ocean level of pressure at the Fortress Inquisitorius. A lot of critics of the show found this to be unrealistic, which is a valid criticism on the surface until you look at some of the underlying factors. First of all, it was something that was done with a deep desire from Ben to protect Leia. These critics also say that Ben had quote-unquote lost his powers and that it's unrealistic for him to do anything like that. First of all, the Force is not a power that you lose, but something that can become dormant or weaker when not in use like a muscle. Reactivating it can take time. We've seen this with Cal Kestis in Jedi Fallen Order, but the difference is that Cal was a Padawan at the time of Order 66, and Obi-Wan was a Jedi Master. His mastery over the Force was significantly higher than Cal's, and therefore the threshold of how much retraining he must do in order to quote-unquote unlock his abilities again is much lower. Think of it like as if Obi-Wan was a boxing champion who retired in his prime and came back to boxing after a 10-year hiatus from the ring. Sure, he'll have some ring rust, but that doesn't mean that he has to restart his training from the beginning. Nor does that mean he'll be at the exact same skill level as before. A boxer who's been out of the ring for that long needs some time to shake the cobwebs off, and that's exactly what Ben did. Granted, not for how long it should have been from a creative angle, but he still had to struggle to get back to that level. And him finding his purpose in protecting Leia accelerated his return to how good he was by the end of Revenge of the Sith. And it maybe pushed him over the edge to possibly become even better than what he was by the end of his adventure. The aforementioned purpose, coupled with his abilities coming back in full force, begins his transition back from being just old Ben to fully becoming Obi-Wan Kenobi again. His manipulation of Reva and the clever deception tactics that he employs on Jabin is a throwback to how General Kenobi conducted his tactics and strategies during the Clone Wars. He also defeats Darth Vader in their third duel, and my theory as to why is pretty interesting, so listen closely. I believe that the battle between the two sides of the Force is partly a battle between selflessness and selfishness. The light side of the Force is fueled by selflessness, and the dark side of the Force is fueled by selfishness. Obi-Wan defeated Vader because of his selflessness, as in his purpose and selfless desire to protect not only Luke and Leia, but also the people from the path who were on the ship, trumped Vader's selfish desire to destroy Obi-Wan. It pushed him to become more powerful than he could possibly have been before. Yeah, he had purpose before during the glory days of the Jedi, but he was not often as driven as he was in Kenobi. Just like how the dark side is augmented by pain, fear, and anger, the light side is boosted by resolve, willpower, and purpose. And Obi-Wan's light in this case was more powerful than Darth Vader's darkness. So Obi-Wan defeats Vader and breaks his helmet open, and when he sees Anakin's face for the first time in 10 years, he breaks down and apologizes to his former apprentice, which lifts a huge weight off of his shoulders, because it's something that Obi-Wan has wanted to do for many years, for mutilating and disfiguring Anakin and leaving him to die a slow and painful death on Mustafar, as well as having failed him as his master, mentor, and as a friend. Vader surprises Obi-Wan by telling him that he was not Kenobi's failure, but that Darth Vader consciously chose to kill Anakin Skywalker when he turned to the dark side. That vindicated Obi-Wan. Sure, he was Anakin's master, but Obi-Wan is not responsible for the actions taken by his apprentice, nor is he responsible for the manipulation done by Darth Sidious to turn Anakin against the Jedi. He finally understood that his friend that he once knew is no longer alive, and Obi-Wan left the duel with peace in his heart. He then says his goodbyes to Leia, gets a chance to finally meet Luke, and he finally gets to see his old master Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon says that Obi-Wan wasn't ready to see him for all of these years, because Obi-Wan had abandoned the ways of the Jedi and had to find his way back onto the Jedi path. Obi-Wan finally returned onto the aforementioned path and began training with Qui-Gon to achieve immortality, and to eventually become the wise old man that trains the next chosen one who would ultimately defeat the Sith and bring balance to the Force. The big question now is, why do I think that Obi-Wan's arc was perfectly done in this show? Surely it's a step back from his character evolution because he was a wimp at the beginning of the show, right? Well, taking those steps back and then taking the right steps forward again is a part of a person's arc. People think that once you've learned a lesson, you don't fall back into the trappings that the lesson warned you against, which isn't true at all. People, not just characters, but people in real life, can regress significantly after they've experienced horrible and traumatic things. And sometimes they never get out of that rut that they went in, but sometimes they do, and that's why this arc is so great. You have a man who had everything, lost it all, and then regained them through hard work and diligence, while at the same time regaining his self-confidence and becoming greater than he ever was. It is, in my opinion, a very inspiring story to tell. So I guess the lesson here is, life is not always a straight path. Sometimes you regress into old or bad habits, but it's important that you move past those habits and get your life back in order to not only make the people around you proud, but more importantly so that you respect yourself enough to never slip back into those bad habits again. And if you can become that beacon of self-discipline and self-respect, you can inspire the people around you to better themselves, so that they're not only improving their own lives, but they will in turn have a better relationship with you, so that you guys can grow to even greater heights together and finally reach your truest potential. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe if you want more. If you have any comments or disagreements, please leave them down below. I would love to engage with you guys, and I would love to hear the ideas that you guys have on this topic. I hope you guys are enjoying these video essays. I really enjoy producing these videos as they are different but similar to my podcast, if you know what that means. I can't believe it's been a year that I've been uploading videos on this channel, and I've learned so much since I started. If you are a longtime subscriber, thank you so much for being here and supporting this channel. If you're a new subscriber, buckle up because there will be more of these kinds of videos. If you want to see the very first podcast I did a year ago on the Kenobi series, click the link on the left of the screen. Thank you guys again for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.